something is happening right in front of everyone, and almost nobody wants to admit it. For generations, there was an unwritten agreement. Men pursued, women chose. Men worked harder, competed, proved their worth, and came back for more, no matter how many times they were ignored. That was the game. And the game held together because everyone accepted one thing as absolute truth: that men would always be available. That no matter how demanding the conditions got, there would always be another man willing to step up and try. That assumption just collapsed, and the reaction from a lot of people is pure disbelief, because nobody anticipated that men's response wouldn't be to complain louder. It would be to stop playing altogether. We're going to break this down into 3 parts. First, why the fear of being alone stopped working as a control mechanism. Second, how technology and self-improvement culture gave men real alternatives for the first time. And third, why solitude stopped being a stigma and became a status symbol. Pay close attention to that third part, because it's the one that most unsettles the people who still don't understand what's going on. For a long time, the single engine that kept men inside the romantic market was fear. Not the desire to be with someone, the fear of not being. There's a massive difference between those two things, and that difference changes everything. When you act from desire, you choose. When you act from fear, you comply. And men, for decades, complied. They tolerated situations that drained them. They accepted terms that made no sense. They kept trying even when the numbers didn't add up, because the alternative, being alone, felt worse than anything else. But something shifted in that equation. Men started discovering that there is a fundamental gap between the loneliness that hurts and the solitude that builds. One leaves you empty, the other leaves you complete. And once a man experiences what it actually feels like to own his time, his money, his space, without constant friction, without endless negotiation, the fear loses its grip. A man who is genuinely at peace cannot be pressured, and a system that ran entirely on pressure runs out of tools the moment that man stops feeling what he was supposed to feel. That is exactly what is happening right now. And this isn't just an emotional shift. There's math behind this decision, because what changed isn't only how men feel. It's how they're evaluating the exchange itself. Think about what a relationship demands from a man in today's context. Financial commitment, time, emotional energy, exposure to risk. And on top of all of that, the expectation that he does it without complaining, with enthusiasm and feeling grateful just for the chance to participate. He pays for the dates. He makes the first move. He absorbs the rejections. And if he falls short anywhere along the way, the blame lands on him. Now add technology to the picture. 20 years ago, a romantic relationship was essentially the only way a man could access genuine connection, feel valued, or find shared purpose. If you wanted company, you needed people in your physical world. That world no longer exists the same way. A man today can build an entire life from where he stands. Online communities that give him belonging, digital projects that give him purpose and income, remote work that gives him geographic freedom, deep friendships with people who actually share his real interests. The gap that only a partner used to fill now has multiple ways of being filled. The romantic relationship went from being the only available door to being one door among many. And when you have real options, every negotiation changes completely. You cannot convince someone they need something they no longer feel is missing. But here's what's accelerating this faster than anything else. Because while all of this was unfolding, something else was quietly growing that nobody anticipated. A male self-improvement culture that is giving men something relationships don't always deliver. Male self-development culture is not slowing down. The gym, business building, technical skills, financial discipline, personal goals. Men are taking all the energy they use to spend chasing someone else's approval and pointing it inward instead. Why does it stick so well? Because it offers something the modern dating market simply does not guarantee: results proportional to effort. You lift consistently, your body changes. You learn a skill, your level rises. You build a habit, your life improves. There is a clear, direct line between what you invest and what you get back. That line in the dating world does not exist. You can do everything right and still get nothing. For a rational person, that is a signal that the system isn't worth what it asks for. And then came mass exposure. Social media opened a window that didn't exist before. Men can now observe the dating market from the outside before they ever decide to step in. They see the standards being demanded publicly. They see the patterns repeating. They see what happens to men who invest everything and end up worse off than when they started. You don't have to experience something personally for it to discourage you. You just have to watch it happen enough times. And what many men concluded from watching was straightforward. The risk is too high and the return is too uncertain. So they chose not to participate. Not out of bitterness, not because they failed, but because they looked at the available information and made an informed decision. Now, here's the part that catches most people off guard. Solitude is no longer what happens to you when nobody chooses you. For a growing number of men, it's what you choose when you decide the game isn't worth playing. A man who travels when he wants, spends his money on what he actually values, goes to sleep without unresolved conflict, and wakes up without obligations he didn't select. That man isn't hiding his solitude. He's presenting it as an achievement. And other men watch him and think, that's an option available to me too. The social pressure that used to work because there was shame attached to the single man is fading. How do you make someone feel bad about being alone when that person is visibly thriving? Here is the conclusion that makes this conversation so uncomfortable. For decades, the message was consistent. Men had to earn the right to be chosen. They had to prove themselves, improve themselves, push harder. And underneath that message was a silent assumption that men would always be available to keep trying. Nobody seriously considered the possibility that men would evaluate that arrangement and decide it didn't work for them. And now that they are doing exactly that, the shock is real, because rejection within the game is manageable. You can shake it off, rationalize it, move forward. But voluntary disengagement is something entirely different. A man who never even enters the field cannot be rejected. He's simply not available. A no-pressure tool works on someone who no longer feels they need what's being offered. This is not a passing trend. It is a generational recalibration. Marriage rates continue to fall. Younger men are delaying or completely setting aside long-term commitment, not because something is broken in them, but because they observed the outcomes of the generations before them and decided they wanted something different. So, what is actually happening here? Men are not giving up. They are not bitter or defeated. They are exercising an option that always existed, but that nobody believed they would use: the option to simply not play. The biggest shift isn't rejection. It's voluntary disengagement. And that disengagement is forcing a conversation many would rather avoid. What happens when male presence in the romantic market is no longer guaranteed and actually has to be earned? That question is worth sitting with, because the answers we arrive at now are going to shape how relationships are structured for the next generation. Do you see this as a move toward freedom or a warning sign of something deeper? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think, the next video goes even further.